At 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, something the world had been waiting for finally happened. The guns fell silent. After 4 years of bloodshed, after countless lives lost, the Great War, had come to an unexpected, sudden end. But what did it mean for the soldiers, the families, the leaders who had lived with the war every moment? The silence was deafening, yet it wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the weight of a peace that no one knew how to carry. Sergeant Clark knew war. He had lived it. But now, as he stood there, the weight of peace was far heavier than the weight of his rifle. The question that haunted him wasn't about victory. It was about survival. The war was over, but would he ever be free from its echoes? Kurt Muller stood in the heart of Berlin, hearing the first whispers of peace, but he knew peace was not something that could be signed into existence. Not for him, not for any of them. They were the last to leave the battlefield, and the first to feel the true cost of the silence. The war had stolen more than their bodies. It had stolen their souls. London danced, cheered, and shouted for joy. But Eleanor West could not join them. She had waited for this moment, but her heart was still buried in the muddy fields of France. With Edward, the war had ended, but for her, it would never be over. She had lost more than a fiancé. She had lost a piece of herself to eye in the trenches. It wasn't peace they could hear. It wasn't victory they could see. All they felt was a silence that had come too late. The war had taken everything from them. But now, as the silence grew louder, they wondered if it had taken more than just their comrades. What happens when the battle stops? But the war inside you never does. As the clock struck 11 a.m. across Europe, the world held its breath. The guns fell silent. But inside every soldier, every family, every leader, the war raged on. What did peace really mean after everything that had been lost? In Paris, the city of lights, the streets filled with cheers, yet Marie Dufresne couldn't bring herself to join them. She had waited for this moment. But it wasn't the victory she had imagined. Her fiancé, Jean, was buried in the field of Somme, his body lost to the ravages of war. The city of her dreams, now filled with celebration, felt alien to her. She wondered, was peace a blessing or a curse? For Arthur Clarke, the peace was more suffocating than the war ever was. The trenches had been home, a strange, terrible home, but a home nonetheless. The silence now felt unnatural. How does one live after years of endless noise? After watching friends die, after walking through nightmares too real to leave behind? Arthur had survived the war, but the war was far from over. For Kurt Muller, the end of the war meant the beginning of something else entirely. There was no victory to celebrate here. Berlin was a city of broken promises, of men who had fought and failed. For him, there would be no homecoming, no parade, no medal, just a weight of defeat. Kurt knew that the silence around him was not peace, but a prelude to something darker. As the world cheered, Eleanor's heart grew heavier. The war had ended, but for her, the war had only just begun. She had lost more than a fiancé. She had lost a part of herself. The man she had loved was now a casualty of history. The victory belonged to everyone else. To her, it was just a reminder of what she had lost. The final moments before the ceasefire were no less filled with anxiety. Private John George, like so many others, was caught between relief and uncertainty. The war was over, but the battle within him raged on. For men like him, peace was not the end. It was a new beginning, a beginning without purpose, without the fire that had once fueled his every step. But in the hearts of the soldiers, the silence spoke louder than the guns ever had. What would the peace mean for them, for their families, for the world? It wasn't the end. They all knew that now. It was the beginning of something they couldn't yet understand. The war was over, but peace had not yet begun. The streets of Paris, London, and Berlin may have been filled with jubilant crowds, but for the men who had fought, who had seen the horrors of war, the battle was far from over. The victory belonged to those who had stayed home, to the families that had waited. But for these men, there was no return, no closure, only the hollow echo of silence. For men like John George, the silence felt like a void that no one could fill. The battle had taken everything from them, their brothers in arms, their dreams, their sanity. But now that the fighting was over, what was left for them? How do you return to a world that never truly understood the price of peace? In Berlin, the silence wasn't golden. It was a weight that pressed down harder with each passing day. The country was defeated. The people were broken. And Kurt Mueller, like so many others, was left to wonder if his sacrifice had meant anything at all. In the cities, on the front lines, there were no winners, only survivors. London streets were filled with the hope of reconstruction. But hope in Eleanor's heart was a hollow thing. Her fiancé was not coming back, and nothing would ever bring him back. The peace that everyone talked about seemed empty to her. What kind of peace is there when so much has been lost? For soldiers like Clark, the silence of peace was suffocating. They had survived the trenches, but the real battle had only just begun. How do you heal when every corner of your mind echoes with the ghosts of the war? And how do you tell others that the peace they celebrated was the same peace that tore you apart? As Europe began to rebuild, the men who fought for it were left to rebuild themselves. But could they? Could any of them ever truly find peace after what they had seen? Hit the like and subscribe button and turn on your notification bell icon for more.